and welcome to another episode of the Freedom's Journal podcast. My name is Yusuf Shabazz. Most people call me Brother Shabazz. It's good to be here, and it's good to come here to offer you some food for thought for this evening. Our topic for the discussion for this evening will be that of black education. When we start off with a quote from James Baldwin, education is indoctrination if you're white, subjugation if you're black, according to the Honorable James Baldwin. What is meant by those words that Mr. Baldwin stated there, that education is indoctrination if you're white, meaning because of the educational system that we engage ourselves in, it's white dominance. And it said that it's indoctrination, it indoctrinate them into their thinking. But when it comes to us, it's subjugation. And subjugation is defined as bringing someone or something into domination or control. And I humbly submit to you this evening that the educational system has served as a control mechanism for African Americans, for black people, for African descendants of African people, to control our thinking, to control our actions, and control the very essence of our being. The act of bringing someone into control, under control of subjugation, it is the purpose of the educational system that we find ourselves in here in the Western world. We want an education that teaches us our true history and herstory and our role in the present day society. And we also want an education wherein we don't lose ourselves in the process, wherein we don't lose our identity in the process. We want to know what part did we play, and what part do we play. Right now, if I take a picture of everyone that's in the room, when that picture is developed or it comes back, the first thing you're going to look for is yourself in that picture. And if you don't see yourself, you know that there's a problem and something is wrong. Well, something is definitely wrong when you can't see yourself in the process and when you lose your identity in the process. The illustrious work of Dr. Maulana Karenga, who gave us the principles of Kwanzaa or the Nguzo Saba. Dr. Karenga has a principle and it's called Kujichagulia. And Kujichagulia is defined as self-determination, meaning that when you define self, when you name self, and you do something for the benefit of self and kind. If you allow someone else to do this, they're going to define you in all sorts of ways. But we want the right to define ourselves and do something for ourselves. We must have a knowledge of self, brothers and sisters, and it lays the basis for everything else. When you have a knowledge of self, it creates what is called a love of self. But you cannot love that which you do not know. And you cannot do for that which you do not love. You see, once we learn about ourselves, our history and our herstory and our sojourn in the world, and know that we led the world in science and mathematics and culture. We gave the world culture. When we know these things, see, when you have a knowledge of self, you acquire knowledge of self, it creates a love of self. You fall all the way in love with your black self.
That's right.
But in terms of black education, we must ask ourselves three questions. We must satisfy these three questions. And that is, who am I? And am I all I ought to be? Who am I? Am I who I am? And am I all I ought to be? Those are the questions. Who are you? Well, brothers and sisters, we are the original black man and black woman, the original man and black woman of the planet Earth. We're the mother and father of civilization. We gave the world civilization, and we should be proud of that. To see your enemy, Dr. Garvey said, Mr. Garvey said, to see your enemy and knowing your enemy is part of a complete education. It's part of the complete education of the black man and black woman. So your knowledge is not complete, or your education is not complete until you know who your enemies are. Who your enemy is very important. Those who want to see you, see your demise. And we have the same enemy, the same detractors. And we must know who our enemies are. That's part of a complete education according to Mr. Marcus Mosiah Garvey. To see your enemy and knowing your enemy is part of a complete education. The complete education of the black man and black woman. You know, I spent about maybe 3 years in the public school system. And I taught the building trades. But when the students would come in, and I would give them a password in order to get in the class. And that password would identify them. And if they could not quote or recite that password, then they could not get in the class. See, the purpose of education is to know why you're there. It's like a used car. You look good behind the wheel. It looks good. It smells good. But the true test of that automobile is when you go to put it in motion. Does it go forward? And when you go to put it in reverse, does it go backwards? Does it reverse on you? Does it operate the way that it looks, the way that it smells, and the way that it appears? If not, then someone has sold you a lemon. And that's what has happened to black people here in the hills of North America. They have sold us a bag of goods that we can't use. You know, we can run 3M and IBM and Microsoft and all these other multi-million-dollar companies, billion-dollar companies, but we can't control the economics and politics of our community. We don't know how to set up stores in our community. We don't know how to set up economic institutions in our community that provide what we either need or want. But other people come into our communities and suck the economic blood out of our community with less so-called education. The Palestinians, the Arabs, the Greeks, the Indians, the Vietnamese, the whites come into our community and nurse themselves to economic strength in a vacuum while we're so busy building the coffers of one another. It goes back to what Dr. Baldwin said, what Mr. Baldwin said. Education is indoctrination. If you're white, it's indoctrination. But if you're black, it's subjugation. Meaning, you're supposed to be so educated that you can't provide goods and services that your community either need or want. And we leave that responsibility up to other people, and we make them rich overnight. We make them wealthy overnight. We create generational wealth for other people. It's because our education allows that. The form of education that we get allows them to do that. And it allows us to be stagnated. The illuminous work of Dr. Carter G. Woodson, who gave us Negro History Week, Negro History Bulletin, and African American or Black History Month. He wrote a book entitled The Miseducation of the Negro. That in fact we have not been educated, but we've been trained. We've been miseducated. Say that if you control a man's or a woman's thinking, then you control their activity, you control their action. And that you don't have to even relegate them to the back door. If there isn't a back door, then they'll create one. They'll cut one out, Dr. Carter G. Woodson said. And so all of these things are true. And I want to let you know this, brothers and sisters, that a true education begins with the knowledge of self. The mere imparting of information is not true education. Above all things, the efforts must result in making a person, making a man or woman think and do for themselves. it is very important that you do something for self. And if you don't do something for self, you suffer the consequences. Going back to what I said before when I was teaching in the school system, there was also a threat of any strong male presence in the school system. Because if you look at the school system, there's a lack of male presence, strong male presence in the school system. It feels threatened because of black male dominance. It's very important that black young men in the school system see someone that looks like them, someone who cares about them, someone who has love and respect for them, the lack of role models in our school system. That's why really we need to take the responsibility of educating ourselves and not leave that responsibility up to anyone else. I'm in favor of homeschooling. I'm in favor of black independent schools where we can teach our young brothers and sisters how to do for themselves. You know, when you study communication, English, history, literature, world civilizations, those things are subjective. But when you teach or study the nation building skills, such as mathematics and science and physics and statics and dynamics and chemistry, those things that will allow you to build a nation, those are real subjects. Those are that's real knowledge that you can take and build a reality for yourself. But when we look at most African Americans, when they go to school, they shy away from those disciplines such as mathematics and engineering and science and chemistry and physics and technology. We must begin to embrace those disciplines and take over those disciplines and do something for ourselves and kind. You see, if you go to school and you get education and you don't allow your communities to extract from your scholarship, then what good is the education? That was one of the talented 10th concepts of Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, that all of us were not going to go to school. All of us are not going to go to the university, but those that did will come back and allow the community to extract from their scholarship. Each one teach one and raise ourselves up by our own bootstraps. Mr. Booker T. Washington, brilliant man. And if you look behind me, you'll see the statue of Booker T. Washington lifting the veil of ignorance off of the slave and pointing the way to freedom and independence and industry. This is what we need. We have to begin to go back to the earth and develop this earth, this good earth that we can call our own. Land. We have to have it. We have to go back into agriculture. We must learn to take our mouths out of the kitchen of our enemies. We must learn and teach each other. We must begin to nurture and develop our families and our children. We must begin to teach them to be strong and courageous. Bringing someone into domination. We don't want to be dominated. We want free, independent thinking. Free, independent thinking. Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois said that the future of our race, of our babies, our children, depends upon how far we are willing to go to teach them to think independently. We must begin to think independent, think critically, and think independent of other people. It does not matter what other people think about you and your own reality. You must begin to create a reality for yourself. We must begin to create a reality for ourselves and don't worry about what other people think about us. That we've been the burden bearers of this nation. We've been the first hired, last hired, first fired. We've been to pack the unemployment lines. And it's because we have not been properly trained and taught. We must learn to do something for self or suffer the consequences. You see, We must learn what our true role, our history and herstory, and our true role in this society that we live in, and that we will create a reality for ourselves. If we don't do that, then we can't properly relate to anything else. The love of self is developed when you get the chance to know who you really are. Know that your people are not just cotton pickers. Know that your people your history and herstory didn't just start with slavery. That it started way back, centuries upon centuries ago, in your native home and land. You see, we must know this about ourselves. Our history and herstory does not start with the institution of slavery or the Black Holocaust. It started way before then, way before we came to the shores of North America, way before 1555, way before then. That we built the pyramids, we built empires, and we built civilizations that outlive other civilizations. We built monuments of our grand doing thing. We must realize these things. We must realize all the great accomplishments that we've made in history and herstory. And once we do that, then we can't help but fall all the way in love with ourselves. It is very important, imperative that we do this. You see, we must also begin to teach each other, to inform each other, to do something for self or suffer the consequences. Until next week, Hotep, may the peace that only Almighty God can be upon you. Hotep, Alafia, free the land and black laws for black people. For whatever, backwards never.
Shabazz Seafood Restaurant, home of the best fish in Savannah, where the fish is so fresh, it was swimming in the ocean just last night. This weekend, we are having our Shabazz Seafood Festival, featuring our Shabazz Seafood Platter that comes with fish, shrimp, and crab. Follow us today on Facebook and Instagram at Shabazz Seafood. And don't forget to sign up for our email list at shabazzseafood.com.